Hey guys, welcome to today's lecture on new criticism. In the year 1941, an American critic and academician named John Crowe Ransom published a work titled The New Criticism. In this work, he gave an account of the kind of practices that he followed in his university. While he taught his students, he used to give them poems belonging to the modern era. And without giving any biographical detail about the author, without even mentioning the name of the author, he would ask them to write a critical appreciation of these poems solely based on their content, solely based on the linguistic nuances and literary devices used in the poem. So he compiled his entire work and published it under the title The New Criticism. And it flourished in America in the 1920s and the 1960s. Now remember, 1920s was also the time period in which modernism was coming into being. There was also the incipient ideas of postmodernism in the air. And T.S. Eliot also wrote many critical works related to text during this time period. Now, new criticism is a completely scientific approach to the study of literature, and it inaugurated the trend of theoretical criticism. Till then, we were only talking about practical criticism, but from new criticism onwards, there was a new trend towards theoretical criticism, to what we now call as theory and the application of theories in analyzing a literary text. Now, it was more or less a scientific approach. The new critics were purely textual. It was based on the text. They were purely textual, and the ideas that they put forth were abstract ideas, and it was intrinsic. It existed inside the text, and it was non-scholarly. A layman could understand their tenets. So that was how they approached criticism. They emphasized on literature as an autonomous entity by laying much emphasis on close reading of the words within the text. So what they employed in analyzing a literary work was close reading. So they considered literature as an autonomous entity, an entity which can exist in itself, a self-sustaining entity, an entity which can exist within itself, and they laid much emphasis on close reading of literary text without looking at the author's biography or without looking at the effect that it had on the readers. They purely focused on the text. Now, for the new critics, words within the text deserves special attention. So, for the new critics, the words that are there within the text, the linguistic nuances, the stylistic nuances, it has more importance than any other thing. This included the author's intended meaning. So when they are talking about the text and the words within the text, it means the author's intended meaning. The meaning derived from areas outside the text did not hold much importance. So remember, this was also the time period in which, even Freudian and Lacanian theories were coming into being, and people were looking at text from the author's point of view, from the effect that it had on the reader. But new critics said that we need to focus solely on the intention of the author, what the author had in mind while writing a literary text. That is of importance, and you need to focus on close reading too. You need to analyze the linguistic nuances that exist within the text. Moving forward, who were the new critics? Now, I have given some of the names here. So the first and foremost is John Crowe Ransom, because he gave the term new criticism. Then came I.A. Richards, F.R. Lewis, Cleanth Brooks, Robert Penn Warren, William Empson, R.P. Blackmore, Alan Tate, and William K. Wimsatt. You need to remember the name of all the new critics, because from an examination point of view, if you don't write the name of the new critics, then it won't do. You need to remember the name of all the new critics. Now we shall take a look at some of the major works written by these critics. So first and foremost is the Principles of Literary Criticism and Practical Criticism, which was written by I. Richards. Here too he employed the use of close reading in analyzing a literary text. Here also he enunciated the idea of how he used to give poems to his students and they were asked to analyze these poems without taking a recourse to the author's biographical information. So the first and foremost work that you need to remember is Principles of Literary Criticism and Practical Criticism, written by I. Richards. Then New Criticism as a movement was greatly influenced by T.S. Eliot, especially his critical essays in which he talks about defamiliarization and the like. Another work which came into being was the 7 Times of Ambiguity. Now, in this lecture, we will not be dealing with ambiguity because ambiguity in itself is a vast area. So we will be discussing it in another lecture. So there was this book which was written by William Empson, and it was named 7 Types of Ambiguity. Next major work, or the major literary output, came from F.R. Leavis. Now F.R. Leavis published many articles in a journal named Scrutiny, and the journal named Scrutiny is linked with New Criticism. So they might ask you this question as a one word. The journal linked with New Criticism, it is Scrutiny. Another work which was written by Cleanth Root was The Well-Wrought Urn. All these works are related with New Criticism and it deals with the tenets of New Criticism. Moving on. Now let's take a look at major tenets of New Criticism, or the major approaches in New Criticism. So the major approaches in New Criticism include the autonomy of the text. The text is considered as the be-all and end-all in New Criticism. Then comes close reading, where you analyze a literary text in detail without looking at the author's biographical entries. We are solely looking at the linguistic nuances that exist within the text. We are solely looking at the stylistic features that are existing within the text. We are studying the text closely. So that is the meaning of close reading. Then they gave more importance to verbal principles. They gave more importance to similes, metaphors and the like. And they considered that there is no need for genre division, and they didn't give much importance to Aristotelian ideas such as plot, character, thought, etc. They considered that there is no need for genre division. There is no need to distinguish between poetry, prose and drama as 3 different entities when you analyze a text. Another was the idea of irony, paradox, tension and ambiguity. Now we shall be dealing with all these ideas in detail. Now let's take a look at it. What is meant by autonomy of a text? The New Critics believed that the text is considered as an independent entity. It exists in itself. It is a self-sufficient, self-sustaining entity. Now this is the principal law of New Criticism. The text is considered as an independent entity. It can exist without the author, it can exist without the reader's emotional response to it. It exists as an independent entity. Once it is written, once a text is written, the author is dead. That's also another concept closely related with Roland Barthes. Now, this is the primary law of New Criticism, that a text is an independent entity. Now, T.S. Eliot famously said that a poem is primarily a poem and nothing else. Now, what he meant by a poem is primarily a poem and nothing else is that there is no need to go out and fetch the author's biographical entry, nor is there any need to look at different backgrounds like the social conditions at the time of the writing of the work, or the temperament of the author, how he was when the work was written, etc. And the works that it has on the reader is of little significance, or it is of no importance in New Criticism. So reference to biography, temperament of the author, social conditions of the time of writing the work, and effects it produces on the reader is of no importance when it comes to New Criticism. Hence, New Critical approach is that they consider text as an autonomous unit. and they also take an objective approach. Their approach is not subjective, in that they are not talking about the author's intention or the effect it had on the reader. So it's not at all subjective, it is purely objective, it is clinical, it is scientific. Moving on, now let's take a look at another key feature of new criticism. Now the new critics, for that instance, they focused on close reading. Now close reading implies meticulous and uninterrupted interpretation of any text. So if you read a text meticulously without any interruptions, trying to analyze the text as such, then that is known as the close reading of a literary text. It is a procedure that involves comprehensive analysis of a work, giving special attention to various components. So you need to do a close reading whenever you are analyzing a literary text, when it comes to applying theories or coming up with new ideas about a particular text. What you need to do is that you need to analyze the literary text, each and every detail. You need to give account of each and every detail that's given in the text. So it involves a comprehensive analysis of a work, giving special importance to various components that are there within the text, even the stylistic features, the thought, etc. Emphasis is to be given to the complete understanding of a word or a passage and its multiple meanings. So whenever you read a text, you need to read the entire passage. You need to understand each and every word and understand each and every passage. Now each and every word is open to multiple interpretations. Similarly, a passage may be open to a multiple interpretations. Once you finish reading the text, you must have a comprehensive idea of the text and the words that are used. So here we will take a look at all those stylistic nuances that the author used. Sometimes the author might use irony, sometimes he might make use of paradox, etc., while analyzing a literary text. So here we are doing a comprehensive reading of the text. Now, verbal principle. The principles of new criticism are verbal, and that it pertains to words. Literature is regarded as a language on its own. The language that we use in literature is different from the language that we use in everyday speech. Literature has a language of its own, and we will be able to clearly distinguish between the language of science and the language of literature, right? So if a botanist see a flower, he will be analyzing the stamen, the stigma, the pollens, etc. But at the same time, if a literary student or a poet sees a flower, he might write a poem like the daffodils or Oh My Love is Like a Red Rose. That is the difference between scientific temperament and literary temperament. Now, literature is regarded to have a language of its own, and it's clearly different from scientific, clinical, objective language. Now, new critics opposed the language of science. Now, organic unity of structure and meaning is given a great deal of importance when it comes to new criticism. So, the kind of context that you place a text in, the meaning that the text gives out, and the structure of the text is of importance. For example, if you are writing about a man who has gone partly insane, then you can make use of an unreliable narrator while using his story. So we ourselves might know that whatever that this person is saying is not true, or there is no need to believe him 100%. So there should be a unity between the meaning that the text gives out and the way in which it is presented, the form. There should be a kind of relation between the structure of the text and the meaning it produces. New critics focuses on the analysis of meaning and interaction of words, figures of speech, in addition to symbols in a text. So till then, people focused on symbols, similes, extended metaphors, and the like. But new critics focused on analyzing the meaning, how words interact with each other, how even the stress and intonation is placed on a particular word, what are the figures of speech used. All these will be analyzed by the new critics. all this aspect of the text, both form as well as the meaning, the content or the theme, will be analyzed by the new critics. Now, the new critics also argued that the genre division is not important. There is no need to divide literature as genres. New critics acknowledge various divisions of literature and genres. They acknowledge that there exists a division between various genres in literature, but it is of less importance. It is no importance. It does not hold a prime importance, they said. The Aristotelian concepts of plot, character and thought are not regarded as essential components of a literary work. There is no need to have a coherent plot. There is no need to have a well-developed character, or there is no need to move from one thought to another in a sequential manner, according to new critics. So they acknowledged the presence of genre. They gave due importance to the fact that genres do exist, but they didn't give prime importance to them, and they let go of the Aristotelian concepts like plot, character, thought, etc. On the other hand, they focused more on linguistic nuances that existed in the text. Linguistic elements like words, images, symbols make up a text, whether it is a poem, prose or drama. So there is a lack of commas here, but do bear with me. So linguistic elements like words, images, symbols make up a text, whether it is a poem, prose or drama. That's what the new critics analyzed. They knew that almost all genres, whether it be poem, whether it be prose or drama, all these would contain images and symbols. Now, it is through these elements that plot and character and thought are manifested within a text. So, it is using linguistic nuances and linguistic elements that plot, character and thought are manifested, are established within a text. So, it is the images, it is the words that produce a plot, the character and the thought. The next part is that of irony. Now, since they gave importance to linguistic nuances that existed within a text, they gave also importance to irony. Now, Oxford Dictionary explains irony as an expression of meaning which is often humorous and sarcastic by use of language of different tendency. So, irony is often used to create humor. It is an expression of meaning which is often humorous and sarcastic, and they use language for the purpose of creating humor with a different tendency. So, what sometimes the person clearly states would be different from what meaning is perceived by the audience. In other words, language is used in such a way that there is a sharp difference between the meaning expressed and the meaning perceived. Sometimes a meaning will be expressed, but the meaning that is perceived by the reader or by the audience would be entirely different. So a meaning is expressed, a word is expressed, but the idea that is perceived by the listener or the audience is different. There are different types of ironies. There are non-verbal ironies, verbal ironies, and situational irony. Now, non-verbal irony does not have importance in language, whereas verbal irony is of importance when it comes to new criticism. New critics explained that figurative elements in poetry are irony. All the figurative elements in poetry, whether it be metaphor, whether it be similes, they are all ironical. So new critics explain the figurative elements in poetry as irony. Now, what do you mean by irony, by the way? When you say something and it is perceived in a totally different way, then that is known as irony. Let's take an example. In Julius Caesar, when Mark Antony makes the speech about Caesar, he refers to Brutus and he says, Brutus is an honorable man. So he is talking about Caesar, and he is talking not in a good manner, because the entire city of Rome has turned against Caesar, So while he's making a speech on Caesar, he often repeats the word, these sequence of words. Brutus is an honorable man. Now when you read this, you as an audience know that Brutus is an honorable man is a verbal irony, because in reality Brutus is not an honorable man. He was a person who betrayed his own friend. That is why Caesar said, "You too, brute." So here, though the writer writes Brutus is an honorable man, it has another implication to it. The audience perceives it as something which is negative, something which is cunning as well as negative. Another example of verbal irony occurs again in Shakespeare's Macbeth. In Macbeth Act 1 Scene 4, when Duncan visits Macbeth's castle, he says that this castle hath a pleasant seat. But we, as the readers or as the audience, already know that Duncan is invited to Macbeth's castle to be killed. So we know that even though he says that this castle hath a pleasant seat, a pleasant place to sit and be happy, he is soon to be killed. That is an example of a situational irony. Now all the figurative elements that you use in poems can be considered as quite ironical. New critics explain figurative elements in poems as irony. Moving on to the concept of paradox, and with that we'll come to an end of this lecture. We'll be dealing with ambiguity in another lecture. Now paradox is also a concept which the new critics focused on when they focused on the linguistic nuances of a text. When they read the text closely, they gave importance to paradox as well. I'm sorry, I think one more topic is there, but again, after paradox we'll be discussing tension too. So again, paradox is a word which is taken from the Greek word paradoxon, and it was originally used to designate a statement which was contradictory to the accepted opinion. So it is used to designate a statement which was contradictory to the accepted opinion. A contradictory statement, that's known as a paradox. The point of a paradox is to point out the truth even if the statement contradicts each other logically. So paradoxes are contradictory in nature, but they point out towards the truth. Now it was Cleanth Brooke who talked more about paradox in his well-wrote Urn. He stated that the language of poetry is the language of paradox. So earlier we saw that the language of poetry is the language of irony. Now the new critics say that the language of poetry is the language of paradox. Paradox, what is the meaning of paradox? A statement which is contradictory to the accepted opinion. Let me give you an example. In George Orwell's Animal Farm, there is a statement which states, all animals are equal, but some are more equal than the others. All animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. So it clearly indicates that it is contradictory, right? The first sentence said that all animals are equal. Then all animals should be equal. But the second sentence contradicts the first sentence by stating that but some animals are more equal than the other. If some animals are more equal than the other, then it means that all animals are not equal. But this is known as a paradox. So this is self-contradictory. When you say the phrase the beginning of the end, so when the movie 2012 came into being, they wrote the beginning of the end on the posters. So that is again a contradictory statement. The beginning of the end. How can an end be a beginning? The beginning of the end. So in poetry you can find that literature abounds in paradox, poetry abounds in paradox. That is why new critics said that the language of poetry is the language of paradox. It is self-contradictory. It is contradictory. Paradox was considered as a figurative language by the new critics. To them, all surprising deviation from commonplace opinions and perceptions could be included in the term paradox. So that is the new critical point of view of paradox. If your thought or if the poet's thought deviates from the popular opinion, then that is a paradox. Okay, if it deviates from the commonplace opinion and perceptions, then that is a paradox. If you take it like that, then the entire poetry as such, the language of poetry, is a paradox. Whatever that deviates from commonplace opinion and perceptions was deemed as paradox by the new critics. It was deemed as contradictory by the new critics. Moving on to the last and final slide, which is talking about tension. Now, tension was a term which was introduced by Alan Tate. Now, Alan Tate introduced the term tension to the realm of new criticism. There was a slight mistake. So, Alan Tate introduced the term tension to the realm of new criticism. Now, what do you mean by tension? Now, it's different from our concept of tension of nervous disorder or nervous breakdown. Tension for new critics has an entirely different meaning. Now, if you take any text, there are two attributes to a text. So, one is the concrete and the other is the abstract. Now, in simple terms, the meaning of the text or the context in which the text is written, the meaning it gives out, is an abstract attribute, whereas the form is a concrete attribute. The meaning that a text gives out is abstract. You can have multiple meanings or multiple interpretation to a single word. Hence, the meaning that a text gives out or the context of a text is abstract, and it is known as the intention. By intention, the new critics also meant the intention of the author, whereas the concrete aspect of the text is its form. So, the concrete aspect of the text, which was known by the name form, was also known as extension. Now, often in text, these two concepts or these two attributes or aspects are often contradictory. They are always on a conflict with each other. So these two aspects come into conflict with each other in a work, but in a good work or in a good text, this conflict is resolved. Now, the successful union of the concrete and the abstract, along with the general merging into the particular with the help of denotation and connotation, create an organic unity which is referred to as tension. So there was again a change here. Please take a look at it and then correct it. So as I said before, the meaning of a text, the meaning that a text gives out, is an abstract thing, whereas the form is something which is concrete. Now, in the general sense, there should be a merging between the abstract and the concrete. Only then will it make a good work. So there should be a merging. There should be some kind of a organic unity between denotation and connotation. What do you mean by denotation? Between the literal meaning. Denotation means the literal meaning. When you say apple, the literal meaning is the fruit apple. And there should be a merging between the literal meaning, the denotation, and connotation, the meaning that you ascribe to it. So when you say apple, it can also indicate freshness. When someone says apple, you immediately think about freshness, or you think about the phrase apple in the eye, or apple a day keeps a doctor away. These are all connotations to the word apple. Apple often indicates freshness. In certain instances, apple is a sign of sin, because Adam was given an apple by Eve, it is said. So this is how it works. There should be a unity between the abstract, which is the meaning of or the context of a text, and the concrete, which is the form of the text. The form and the meaning, the form and the context should be in perfect unity. The denotation and connotation should be in organic unity with each other. And when we achieve this organic unity, then that is referred to as tension. Right. So the meaning form intention, the form forms extension, and when there is a union between intention and extension, then it creates a tension. So that's it. We'll be discussing ambiguity in another lecture. Thank you for listening. Take care.